Now we're going to talk about the present and the future of one city, a city very important to you and I because it's our hometown of New York City. I mean, New York, as everyone in this room knows, such a bellwether. And one of the words that obviously jumps to mind when we think about New York, especially over the last 20, 30 years and longer, is resilience. It's in a fascinating moment right now because for those of you who've been in New York recently, and you and I are there every day, there's so much energy. It's so back in a lot of ways. What is it about New York that allows it to have that resilience?
So, I think New York is the quintessential urban ecosystem. And, over the years, it has the right mix of ingredients of, culture and education, healthcare, a lot of things we spoke about here, entertainment, economic opportunity that makes it a magnet for talent. And, and I think that has, and it's been obviously now centuries of this happening in New York, and it's built on itself. And coming to the region for me almost the last 20 years, it's been fascinating to watch in the region these new urban centers being built from scratch and being able to sort of use a playbook without what existed before. And what New York had to do is constantly reimagine itself. That's the trick, right? That's the resiliency part, which is things happen, right? We have 9/11 happens, we have the great financial crisis, we have COVID, right? And New York is the epicenter of these situations, and most of the time, there are obituaries written, and New Yorkers come together, they reimagine what the future of New York is, and hopefully plant seeds to make it even more appealing to attract talent to come back to New York.
So let's talk specifically about what this latest reimagination looks like, because, again, I come into New York City every day to work at Bloomberg. I see a different city, and demographically it's different, where people live, where they work, how they live and work. Tell us specifically what that looks like from your perspective, because your portfolio spans across commercial and residential, multifamily specifically. So how have people's lives and approaches changed? And we started to hear a little bit about that on the previous panel.
Yeah, I think, and to the point of this previous panel, a lot of the trends that you're seeing about how people live, how they work, how they shop, they were starting before COVID.
Okay.
COVID accelerated a lot of that, right? And what happened with COVID, more importantly, was people got comfortable in their own home. So you had to bring them back out and make them feel like there's a reason to leave home and come to the workplaces, which means that, people wanted their workplace to be this sort of convergence of home, hospitality, and workplaces. And, your Bloomberg office is a good example, right? Where you have all those places for gatherings and food and outdoor spaces. The communities in which your buildings are in, you want that energy there on the streets and on the restaurants that are there. That's resulted in the office building business of a flight to quality. So the people want to be in the best buildings. They don't want to be in the obsolete buildings. And so one of the challenges that New York has faced is, this is again, this reimagination, was it's being littered with buildings that are competitively obsolete. They're old, they're side street buildings, and whatever the rent is, people don't want to go occupy those buildings. And so a good example of where you can use good policy to change the way cities are formed, like we've seen again here, is they put incentives in of major tax abatements, 95% real estate tax abatements, if you take an office building and convert it to residential, which in New York, again, is solving two problems. You're taking away old office buildings that were sitting vacant, that were basically becoming a weight on that local community, not paying taxes, place where people loitered, crime, et cetera, to now housing, where we have a shortage of 1.4% vacancy rate in housing in New York, so creating much needed housing in those communities. And on the last panel, they asked the question, how are cities changing? And one thing that I've seen very specifically is that within the cities, there are these little sub-communities, and there are these 15-minute, what I'll call walkable communities. And in those communities, you'll have where people live, where people work, and to be not 5 days a week, but 7 days a week, 24/7 activated communities, which means then restaurants, retail, entertainment have a customer all through that period of time. So you can elevate all that in the mix. And so these 15-minute walking communities within cities, close to public transportation, I think is going to be, an ongoing thing and something that we're seeing in New York right now.
And so, for the investors in the room and for an investor like you, how do you invest against that? What are the things that you definitely do, and maybe what are some of the things you don't do or don't get as enthusiastic about when it comes to, sort of putting your money to work?
Again, I think, and there's been a lot of conversations here, right, which is that when you invest, sometimes if you're close to something and can sort of drown out the noise of the moment, you could see something with better clarity than others can, right? So for example, in 2020, when everyone was leaving New York and the apartments were emptying, we went and bought $2 billion of New York City apartments.
Wow.
While they were all emptying, now they're 99% leased and rents are up 40%. In this time around, everyone was saying no one's going to come back to office space. Starting 18 months ago, we began to buy from institutional investors who just wanted to get rid of their office investments. Class A office buildings. We've now bought about 7.5 million square feet of Class A office buildings in Manhattan. Great locations, great buildings, and there's different than a lot of other markets. There's tremendous tenant demand. So if you can buy it at the right price, fix the capital structure, upgrade it to have that sort of mix of hospitality, energy, community, amenities, you'll lease it. And so, so again, for us, it's been a little bit contrarian against maybe the mainstream, but when an institution believes an asset class is uninvestable and you can see better, then that's when you want to invest, right? Because there's no competition in moments like that.
You talked about some of the buildings being obsolete. One of the things that I know a lot of New Yorkers worry about, which candidly maybe we worry about in this region a little bit differently, is the infrastructure question. Right. Here it's largely a matter of can it be built in time? Can it support? Obviously, the World Cup, as noted, was a huge catalyst to sort of build out. In New York, it's aging infrastructure. It's, a city that's hundreds of years old, and sometimes it feels that way. What are the policies that need to happen? How can you influence it from the private sector? And, you're on the board of the New York Fed. You have a lot of public policy influence and experience. What does New York need to do to ensure that its infrastructure sort of matches the moment?
Yeah, and I think it's a very good point. And again, sometimes it's harder to take something that's old and rebuild it versus building from scratch, right?
Yeah.
And I would say many times harder. And what New York has leaned into, when I was vice chair of the Port Authority in New York and New Jersey for 6 years, and we started at this, was leaning into public-private partnerships, setting policies that incentivize the private sector to actually invest in infrastructure. And so, as an example, at JFK International Airport, there's a $20 billion rebuild of that airport. 85% of it's privately funded. RXR, we're building a Terminal 6, a $4.5 billion terminal. We're funding 100% of that ourselves with private capital. And so putting those plans in place make a big difference. There's in Midtown, there's old office buildings and when Mike Bloomberg was mayor, he put in place a concept of what was called East Midtown rezoning. And the concept was for people who can tear down office buildings, if they put in transit improvements, they would be able to build much bigger buildings in those spots. And so JP Morgan's building a new headquarters in New York on Park Avenue using that methodology. We're doing it. Right, we're tearing down actually the hotel that Donald Trump built years ago, the Hyatt Hotel, and we're building a 2.8 million square foot, $7 billion mixed use office building by Grand Central using that policy. That wouldn't happen if it wasn't for those incentives being put in place to encourage those developments. And it becomes self-reinforcing. JP Morgan does it, we do it, another one does it, and that whole community becomes better along the way.
And so, one of the things that's so notable right now in New York, and you alluded to this with, these sort of 15-minute zones, is, how the city tends to sort of evolve and shift. Hudson Yards and Manhattan West has had a profound effect on, sort of how people live, where they office, et cetera. What happens next in the evolution of New York in terms of where a younger generation may want to move and work, and again, how do you invest against that?
Yeah, so it's interesting based on what we said here before about everything being close, right? New York is very expensive, and we talk about thinking of this region. look what's happened in Dubai, right? A great success story. But sometimes success becomes the challenge, right? The congestion and the ability. In New York, we have an incredible transit system that enables you to take where it's an 8 million person city and actually reach almost 25 million people within 30 to 40 minutes from that city. And I think the evolution of what we're seeing in a city like New York is having more of a regional lens, a regional connectivity, that workforce can actually spread itself out and have what we call sort of urban suburban type setting. So people want to live in an urban environment. It may not be Manhattan, but it could be a downtown that's by a train station, that's walkable, that has culture, that has diversity, that has restaurants and lifestyle, and you're still 20 or 30 minutes away from Manhattan. And so I think these ecosystems are going to spread, and as cities become more successful, and this will eventually hopefully happen in Doha, right, is that it becomes too expensive to live there, so you're going to have to figure out how do I expand that reach.
Well, let's talk about that because, you and I have both been coming to this region for, a while now. Have seen just tremendous growth, whether it's here in Doha, whether it's in Dubai, Abu Dhabi, elsewhere in the region, obviously a lot happening in Riyadh and other cities in Saudi Arabia. What would be your advice, to people who are looking to invest here, to develop here, building on what you just said? Is it going a little further out? Is it sort of doubling down on certain districts? Like you move around this area a lot. Like what's your thought about here?
Yeah, I think, and you're seeing it, to some degree, right? And it's interesting when you go to Riyadh and then you go to Dubai and Abu Dhabi and then you come here. Everyone at sort of a different stage, right? Riyadh was the first, right? And so they're dealing with some of the older issues, infrastructure issues, like New York. In Dubai, they're starting to put the subway system in. I think thinking about public transit, not just, you need that for that creative class, that talent pool that's there, plus you need it for the people that are serving that because they can't afford to live in the inner cities. So how are you going to bring in that level of service? Use moments like the World Cup to develop a larger master plan like they have here in Doha to say, okay, we're building this infrastructure. It's going to enable us to have this incredible event. But then what's the next phase of that post that? That's in New York. Mike Bloomberg led the way with the Olympics. We bid on the Olympics. We didn't win the Olympics, but basically it created the master plan that created the boroughs around it, the connectivity, Hudson Yards. That was all part of the Olympic bid. That never happened, but ultimately resulted in success.
You've alluded to this, Scott, and you talked about the vacancy issue, and I asked this from a personal level. You and I both have college age or, recent college graduate age kids, and as I'm sure, some folks in this room do, my son's graduating from college in like 5 days. He's moving to New York. He's going to live at home because affordability is a huge issue in New York City, as it is in any popular, congested or city that's sort of a hub. What does New York need to do around that affordability question? Because the demand is so high, supply has not caught up.
Yeah, and listen, in the U.S., housing is a major issue across the board, right? There's a 6 million unit shortage of housing in the U.S. In New York City, Manhattan, there's been 900,000 jobs created in the last decade, and only 300,000 new homes created in the last decade. Right?
I'm not that good at math, but that's not good. That's not a good equation.
So I think there's two ways to approach it. Obviously, you got to build more, and you got to build more affordable, which is we're seeing smaller units with more amenities. So we're converting office buildings where we're building 400 square foot, relatively small units that are more affordable, but they have tremendous amenity spaces for the people that live there. The other thing we're seeing is corporations, healthcare systems, universities are now acknowledging that if they're going to be able to attract the best talent to their organizations, they need to provide housing. And so we're actually engaging in workforce housing opportunities where we're going to actually do public to private partnerships to build housing that will be subsidized for those workers, which I think will be a major trend in the United States as well as New York.
And so as you have some really interesting projects going on beyond New York. You've got a big thing going on down in North Carolina, I believe. You're working, across a lot of cities in the Sun Belt. It's interesting to think about what's happening in the broader United States. And I know we're sort of meant to talk about New York, but I think you can't talk about New York without understanding the rest of what's going on in the U.S. what are you seeing in some of those other markets that informs what you do in New York and maybe is relevant, to this region as well?
And I think it is, as you were talking about, it is actually relevant to this region. What happened in the U.S. is, and I would say it was sort of, if those might remember, Amazon, who was based in Seattle, decided they were going to build their second headquarters. And they ran this big process called Amazon, HQ2.
HQ2, right? Yeah.
And New York City bid on it, and it ultimately went to Virginia. But at that point, a lot of our commercial clients began to talk about, because of the affordability issue, trying to set up other hubs around the U.S. where there was migration of talent and trying to tap that talent. And so, they would look at places that had a affordability of lifestyle, good education systems, good healthcare systems, good infrastructure, good leadership. We call them EDS, MEDS, and well-eds, places that target that. So Phoenix,
EDS,
Denver,
MEDS, and well-eds?
EDS, MEDS.
Oh, EDS, MEDS,
So,
okay.
Because you think about healthcare, education, they're proxy where talent goes, right? And leadership, investing in infrastructure, investing in quality of life, investing in job training, investing in bringing companies to be a business-friendly place makes a difference. And so, we've seen that now in parts of the U.S. have really become vibrant as those next round of cities. They're not New York, but they're places that are extraordinarily successful. And I could see that in the region as well as you talk, because more people are saying, okay, there's talent here,
right,
let me locate here. And I think the other, key thing to think about is diversity of industries. Like, what you need to be very sensitive to as you're building these ecosystems is you don't want to become beholden to one industry, right? So we don't invest in Washington, D.C., because if government stops spending, we're done. We don't invest in Houston because if gas and oil goes down. We don't invest in San Francisco because of technology. So we want to have as many industries that are there as possible, because that creates a much more sustainable, self-reinforcing urban ecosystem.
Yeah, and so as we start to wind up, I do want to touch on sort of the policy question. You've worked across public and private. You worked for Governor Andrew Cuomo, who are with him, and now he's obviously a candidate for the mayorship of New York City. This is going to be a critical election. There's a lot that needs to be done in New York. What are you saying to him? What are you advising people when they think about the right policy for New York? Because as we sort of started the conversation, as New York goes, so goes a lot of the rest of the world. What are the key policy issues in your mind?
I think New York, like a lot of the blue, as we call them, places in the states and cities politically, moved too far left. And I think we're now, the people are moving more towards the center, right? At the end of the day, the number one precondition for success of a city is public safety. If people don't feel safe, they're not going to move there, right? So I think that needs to be something put forward, and whatever resources are necessary, that needs to be a big focus. We've spoken a lot about AI and the use of AI. I think that one of the things that he's focused on is how do we reimagine government to be able to use technology to be more efficient. I remember when we were working together, as an example, cashless tolls were happening, and the unions wouldn't let us take away their toll collectors because of the bureaucracy. Over a weekend, we just relocated them and then put up the cashless tolls, and everyone was happy and just assimilated. So you have to break through those bureaucratic barriers and bring technology, create more efficiency to run the cities and service your residents, your customers, your citizens, as if you're competing to keep them.
And we've only got a minute left, and so I was learning more and more about you, preparing for this. You just did a big deal on Madison Avenue this week, I believe it was announced. Clearly the ambition is accelerating for you in New York and elsewhere. What's the next big idea you have in terms of especially commercial real estate development?
As I mentioned, we're building this 2.8 million square foot building. That's going to be it will be the tallest building in the Western Hemisphere. We're doing $500 million of transit improvements next to Grand Central as part of it. A lot of outdoor spaces. It will be, it's right across the street from the Chrysler building, so it will be a part of the iconic New York skyline for generations to come.
Yeah.
And consistent with a lot of what we've heard here, and for those who did dinner last night, it's also embracing architecturally the culture of what New York is. It has the character of what a New York City skyscraper should look like, should feel like along the way. So, but I'm a huge believer in New York, and so far my bet's paid off.
All right. Well, come see us in New York. We really appreciate the time to
Thanks
talk
for
a little
having
bit
us.
about this. Thank you very much.